Hey guys! It seems like folks have been curious, so today I'm going to go through step by step how I make the molds for my dice. If you want to follow along and make your own molds, there's a few supplies you'll need. You'll need Legos, packing tape, and scissors, master dice, or just any old set of dice. You can use any dice, but if you're going to sell them, you'll want masters. Isopropyl alcohol and Q-tips, a craft knife, petroleum jelly, and of course silicone. I use Moldstar 15 slow because I like the longer work time, but it's up to you what you want to use. Oh, also something to mix the silicone in. You might also want a pair of gloves and like a paper towel or a rag or something, but that's up to you. The first thing we're going to do is build our mold forms, which is what like the dice go in and the silicone will get poured into. I use Legos because I can make whatever size I need. We want to make sure there's about a quarter to a half inch of space, about a centimeter, around the die so the walls don't deform. We want the form to be high enough so that there's room for silicone to be on top of the die too, for the same reason. Now that the Legos are all put together, it's time to break out the packing tape to make the bottom of the forms. Usually I put one piece of tape in the center so there's no seams where the die is actually going to get stuck on. And then I add two larger pieces to cover the entirety of the bottom and kind of fold it up a little bit on the sides so the silicone won't leak out. I found that tape works really well for the bases because it makes a nice flat surface to stick the die directly onto, which means that you're not going to get any silicone underneath the die. It makes cleaning up the molds a lot easier. Before we can add the dice or dice masters, I'm using masters in my case, to the molds, we're going to want to clean those dice or dice masters. Even a fingerprint will show up in the mold if it's left on the die, so we want those dice to be as shiny as possible. To clean my dice, I use isopropyl alcohol applied with a Q-tip, and then I wipe the faces off with soft clean cloth. Once the dice are clean, we can go ahead and add them to the mold forms. They should be as centered as possible and firmly attached to the tape. Keep in mind that whatever face you have touching the tape will be the face that is at the top of your mold. Sometimes it's useful to have the highest number up, like if you're planning to add items that have an up and a down. And sometimes it's useful to have the lowest number up, like if you're adding a whole bunch of glitter and you expect it to sink down to the highest number that's at the bottom. So it's up to you, but keep it in mind. I'm using a silicone that uses equal parts of A and B, and so I'm just pouring them into two identical cups until they're filled to the same level, and then I'm pouring those two cups into one larger mixing container. It's helpful to scrape the sides and the bottom of the container to make sure that none of part A or part B got stuck on it somewhere. We want to stir our silicone until it is completely mixed. You can tell when it's completely mixed when it is one uniform color. There's a couple things to do while pouring to help prevent air bubbles from getting into the molds. One of them is pouring in a really thin stream so that large air bubbles can't sneak their way in there. And one of the other things is to pour into the bottom of the form so that the silicone is rising from the bottom instead of getting poured on top and flowing downwards. That way air can't get trapped underneath it. We want to prevent air bubbles as much as we can because if there are air bubbles, they will show up in the molds. Oh, and another way is to just slam the crap out of them. That brings the air to the surface. I'm going to be curing my molds in a pressure pot since they'll be used in one later when I'm making dice in them. I cure my dice at about 40 psi, so I set the molds to cure just a little bit above that. My silicone technically cures in 4 hours, but I usually let it sit overnight in the pressure pot. Now that the main part of the mold is done, we can remove the mold forms. I'm just using a pair of scissors here to clean up the molds a little bit, get rid of some of that extra silicone. Not only does it make the molds look better, but it'll make the next part of making the lids easier. In order to make sure the lids stay in the right place, we'll use a craft knife to cut keys into the silicone. I want them to be deep enough that they'll securely hold the lid in place, but I don't want to accidentally hit the die. Also something I've picked up after making a lot of dice. I usually try to make one key different from the others so that it's easy at a glance to see what direction the lid goes. If all the corners are just cut in triangle shapes, it can be hard to tell how the lid goes on in the moment. Hold on to those little bits you have, too. You can use them to make more molds later. We're going to repeat the dice cleaning process we did before with the isopropyl alcohol on the top faces of the dice now, since they sometimes get sticky residue on them from the tape or fingerprints on them while cutting the keys. Once that's done, we're going to make the forms for our silicone lids. Once again, I break out the packing tape, and this time tightly secure a strip around the top of the molds. I've found that as long as you get it on there pretty securely, that's enough to keep the silicone from leaking out. Now, normally, if you pour some silicone, let it cure, then pour more silicone on top of that, the two would fuse together, which can be useful if you only have enough silicone left in your mixing cup for part of a mold or something like that. But since we want the lids to be removable, we need something to prevent that. That's where the petroleum jelly comes in. It acts as a barrier between the cured silicone that we already have and the new silicone that we're going to pour. We want to get the petroleum jelly on as much of the surface of the mold as possible, including down into the keys, and as close to the die face as possible. But we also want to avoid getting any on the face of the die, or it'll show up when we use the molds later. If you do get a little bit on there, a clean Q-tip and some more isopropyl alcohol can help get it off. Once that's done, it's time to mix up some more silicone and pour the lids. You might aim for 1/4 to 1/2 inch or about 1 centimeter thick of silicone again, but you can get away with the lids being fairly thin. They don't need to be super thick, just thick enough to keep their shape while being used. From there, it's back into the pressure pot, wait overnight for them to cure again, take the tape off, remove the dice, and your new molds are ready to be used. Hopefully you found this video useful, and if you'd like more videos from me in the future, be sure to let me know what you'd like to see next. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Bye!